Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are in the world. My name is Nick Markwith. I'm the Director of Communities at BrightTALK, and today we'll be talking about something near and dear to my heart, BrightTALK's editorial calendar and strategy. Webinars are a cornerstone of any content marketing operation and can really make a significant value to your audience, your brand, and your pipeline if you do it well. And today, I'll be talking about BrightTALK's communities team, all what we do and plan for our editorial strategy and key takeaways that we've learned from producing over 2,000 webinars a year, and to go over some best practices on what we've learned by doing so, as well as researching our audience and understanding what BrightTALK audiences really want from the content they find on BrightTALK. Before we get started, a few housekeeping items. You can ask questions using the questions panel in the bottom left corner of your screen. I'll be answering questions near the end of the presentation, but feel free to submit your questions throughout, and I will get to them near the very end. We have also provided additional resources in our attachments section below the player. Feel free to check that out during or after the presentation for additional resources, as well as a way to contact me through my LinkedIn. In addition, please don't forget to provide feedback and ratings following the presentation. We do appreciate all this feedback and incorporate it into future presentations, and certainly would appreciate it throughout. Before we get started, a little bit more about myself. Like I said, my name is Nick Markwith. I'm the Director of Communities at BrightTALK. What that really means is I manage our editorial team here at BrightTALK. We work with a number of our different products around our online conferences that we call summits, in terms of producing our editorial agenda and direction, as well as identifying experts and thought leaders to present in these events. We run workshops with clients on best practices with their webinar editorial strategy, leveraging the insights and the data that BrightTALK has to help our clients create better content that more resonates with their audience. I've been here for about 8 years, managing our editorial and campaign delivery teams. So I've seen a number of different ways and strategies in which our clients, as well as BrightTALK, has run our webinars. And I have a background in feature and technology journalism. As I mentioned earlier, we'll be talking about 5 key takeaways and best practices to transform your webinar program and editorial calendar. And so as we talk about today, we have, like I mentioned before, BrightTALK has produced roughly about 2,000 webinars a year. And we have insights from over 8 million users on BrightTALK that we leverage to help our clients create better content, as well as create better content ourselves. And so as we go through today, I'll break down the different parts I see where clients can improve in terms of creating better content that better resonates with their audience and drives more pipeline. I'll also be talking about some of our benchmark data, which you can see the benchmark report in our attachments, and applying some actual insights from some of that data and ways in which our clients leverage that data to improve their calendar going forward. So without further ado, I'll get to the first best practice. So first and foremost, this isn't going to be overly revolutionary, but understanding your audience and their pain points is a cornerstone of persona building. But really understanding your audience as humans, as a professional, and the way they learn is crucial to improving your editorial strategy with your webinars. So a little bit on that. So BrightTALK recently, in the past 6 months, ran a survey and analyzed data for our annual benchmark report, and we found a few different interesting things this year. First and foremost, we identified that professionals are spending quite a bit of time on a weekly basis learning and growing. So 48% of our users that we surveyed view on a weekly basis are researching and learning for 3 hours or more across all of the sources of knowledge in which they're learning. And so for me, what that identifies is an opportunity for us to build mindshare and identify ways in which we can capture their attention, because it's not just your webinar, but all the sources of knowledge that they're looking at. And so an interesting tidbit on this, what we found is that the more senior levels of individuals that are researching and learning, spending more and more time. So we found that people with more than 20 years seniority are actually spending 4 or 5 hours a week researching, learning, reading articles, watching webinars, and continually learning for the professional development, as well as identify industries and trends. We'll talk about a little bit more about that a little bit later, but it's a massive opportunity for you to grab their mind share as long as you cut through the noise and really focus on providing actual insights. We also found that our users are also engaging with webinars heavily on a monthly to weekly basis, and so what you see here is 54% of our users that we surveyed are viewing viewing webinars on a weekly basis. This is a huge opportunity, and being able to tap into that type of behavior in which people are continually learning at a reoccurring and predictable time is key to ensuring that you keep your audience engaged, as well as ensure that people are continually learning from you. And so this is why, one of these reasons and why these people are coming back on a weekly basis is for a few different reasons. First and foremost, there's a huge appetite for understanding what's happening in your industry. Whether that means that you're discussing, what has happened in the news that's impacted your industry, whether it's new regulations or laws or a breach in some organization, they want to know what's happening, and you can have an opinion on that. What I find, a lot of people use webinars as a middle to bottom funnel piece of content, when there's an opportunity for you to raise that a bit and create content a lot easier by using timely news sources to have an opinion on it. So that's what they're looking for from you now. You are the expert, and your organizations have the experts, and they want to learn from you. In addition to that, they also want to acquire a new body of knowledge or skills. They want to continue learning, whether that is practical skills or that is understanding how certain new technologies work and how that applies to your industry. You have the opportunity to provide an opinion and a direction and be an editorial voice for your company and your industry. In addition to that, additional things around quality of work, discover new things, and just enjoy learning. People are coming to BrightTALK to continue learning, but also find new ways to help their job, help themselves, and help their careers. And so with that knowledge, knowing that people want to continue learning and that they are looking for ways to develop their career themselves and help solve problems with their organization, it's key then for you to be able to provide actual insights and inspiration to your audiences. So what does that mean? So BrightTALK asks specifically, what types of content do professionals want to learn? What value do they find in content? And so what we found is, practical, actionable insights really is the key cornerstone to ensure that you are providing value to your audience. And so, everyone talks about making sure that you keep your audience in mind when you're talking, and there is a balance between what you want to talk about and what they want to talk about. Of course, sure. But they should be gaining value out of this. And whether that is your opinion and thoughts, or whether that is actual practical insights, tips, and tricks, it's key that you're on top of that. Because you guys have a level of expertise that many organizations outside of the industry or outside of your core specialty don't have, and you can share that knowledge. In addition to that, industry trends and predictions. Where's the industry going? As you build technology within your specific industry and sphere, you have an idea of where you think things are going as you build up your roadmap, as you focus your business in a certain direction. Share that. That's interesting knowledge. You have a key perspective that you can share that possibly no one else has. And that type of insight is interesting to people because they want to know where you think is going so that they go with you on that journey. In addition to that, how-to explainers are good, although that really depends on specific type of the maturity of a industry as well as the level of the user and expertise level. But in addition to that, expert interviews, again, easy content that you can interview experts within your own company or outside. Again, sharing a direction. For me, a lot of expert interviews fall within a kind of a podcast realm. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But there's definitely something along those lines. something I really want to focus on, and we'll talk a little bit more later, is solution case studies and data insights. Solution case studies are a fantastic way for you to tell a story that relate to a lead and a person in your audience's specific problems and interactions. So, people want to hear from real people with real problems. They want to understand how your solutions, how your technology provides opportunities in which you can demonstrate and show how you have improved and provided a solution to a problem. People have real problems, they want real solutions, and telling a story is a better way of doing that than necessarily doing it any other way. People connect with narratives. And then finally, data insights and original research. We'll talk about this a little bit more in a few slides, but understanding you may have a lot of data that no one else has. And so being able to provide that research, and you might see a lot of state of the industry reports and things like that. Those are great, but having kind of actual insights from that research is really key, and it is important to ensure that you are providing value and exclusive content that really no one else can provide. And so with BrightTALK and with our editorial team, we do a process for our editorial calendar every year. For the first 6 months of the year, so we actually just did this process recently, but for the first half of 2020, we're about to release our editorial calendar and our agendas for our BrightTALK summits going into 2020. And so how we go about doing this is roughly a month, about 6-week process in which we do a few different things, and if you look at a few different sources to identify what's trending and what's happening within these different verticals, industries that we're focusing on. So for us, technology and IT tend to be one of our larger communities on BrightTALK. And so we spend a lot of time looking at BrightTALK's own data, looking at what topics are trending based off certain users that we find that we know are more valuable than others, looking at who they're engaging with, what type of content, what level of content, whether it's panels, whether it's webinars, things like that, to really come up with a set agenda that we can leverage going into the following year. And so for us, we've been able to leverage our internal data to look at what we're seeing trend well, what topics is resonating well with clients, which ones are not resonating with our audiences, and start adjusting our editorial strategy looking at that. This is some of the stuff that we look at when we do some workshops with clients, looking at, based off their target audience, what are their target audiences trying to learn from, and what do we see trending going forward. So, for example, we noticed that AI is starting to become more and more of a widespread topic throughout many, many different industries. So next year, as part of our BrightTALK Summit calendar, we're going to have a Human and AI Month, where we focus across multiple different community summits on how AI is impacting communities like sales, IT security, marketing, things along those lines. If you don't have internal data like that, what you can do is look for external data. And so, there's different ways you can source this. So things like questions from whether your existing webinars or using a external site to identify questions that are being asked. These are practical questions that people are asking. These are things that people want to know more about. Some of these will be very, very specific, but this can help you guide your editorial strategy so you know what people actually want to learn about. With BrightTALK webinars, you get a list of reports on questions that are being asked by your audiences. This is easy fodder for you to go and build out your editorial calendar, leveraging these questions that fit into a larger theme of stuff that you want to cover as well. BrightTALK also uses external data. We use BuzzSumo. We like it a lot for a number of different reasons, but we use BuzzSumo for a few different reasons. First is to, we want a balance between this set of internal and external data. And so by leveraging BuzzSumo, they have a number of different ways looking at cross social media, social sites, but it's a really great aggregation of insights that we can leverage to help us define our tool strategy. So for example, we use the question analyzer similar to our own questions on BrightTALK to understand, is there a correlation between the questions we're seeing on our site versus what we're seeing just across Quora and other different sites. They also have other tools around Facebook, Facebook Analyzer, just trending keywords and topics. It's a really powerful tool we find that helps us marry these two data sources so that we have a fuller picture of what's happening and what in these industries that we cover, as well as what we think our audience will care and want. Thirdly, and probably something that I find that many clients don't see as often, is being able to diversify your webinar formats. When someone thinks of a webinar, and this is as webinars defined, they think of, just like how I'm doing it, a PowerPoint presentation with audio. And this is bread and butter webinar, yes, and absolutely is a key part of anyone's strategy, but it isn't the only way in which you can engage with your audiences. And so there are many different ways in which we've been finding to be leveraging the platform to help diversify the type of webinar you're doing, as well as relate it to the type of content you want to create. So, for example, we were talking about running interviews and panels. Doing an interview in this type of format, probably not the most engaging. And so we, generally speaking with interviews, for me, that's similar to a podcast. We have the ability to do webcam talks now. And so what we've been finding that in terms of doing interviews, doing panels, being able to see the individuals, while may require a little more setup on the get-go, really has been creating more value for our audience and a lot more engagement. People want to see others speak, and it's an easy piece of content to create. So, so whether it's a roundtable where you have 3 or 4 presenters speaking on a certain topic, that content tends to do really well for forward-thinking prediction industry pieces. Every year in January, we'll do between December and January, we'll do predictions for 2019 type of content. Because there are lots of things we saw coming from the industries that we're covering that we want our experts to be able to talk about and predict going forward. And that type of content does really well, and it's also an easy setup. The other thing is interviews. As I mentioned before, again, this reminds me more of a podcast model, but you can easily run similar types of content on BrightTALK. Again, either using a webcam talks, or even you could do it even through a webinar, but being able to take your podcast type content, doing it on BrightTALK where you can actually see who's doing that content and what they're engaging with, what questions they're asking, makes it so much more robust than capturing the content on, say, a SoundCloud and posting it there. So, being able to diversify your format in this way is really expands the ways in which you can use a webinar. It's not just necessarily covering here's the features and how our platform works or our technology works or our service works. It's really about how do you engage your audiences throughout the different learning journey, because ultimately, how people buy nowadays isn't a linear, it's not a linear path. And with a platform like BrightTALK, where you are hosting content as a marketer, hosting content for the audiences on BrightTALK, you don't know where the audience is, whether you're driving your audiences or BrightTALK's driving the audiences and people are finding it on BrightTALK. You don't know where they are in their learning journey. And the process can be very convoluted and can go from a variety of different directions. And so ensuring that you have a wide range of content for individuals who in needs and people who don't know who you are, to have an entry point so that maybe it's a little more top of funnel, it's more industry focused or industry predictions focused, more discussion based to draw them in, and then leveraging solution case studies to get them to understand how you solve their problems. We always recommend with our clients to have a wide mix of content, because you don't know where these leads are going to be and where they're educating and what stage they're at, or at what level of knowledge, right? You know, we often think about, you know, getting leads down the funnel and providing more and more product-focused content to try and drive them that direction. But you also have to remember that as these leads are also professionals, and they might be on a wide range of expertise and or seniority level. You know, the buying committee nowadays isn't just one person. It's not the manager, necessarily the director, viewing, you know, watching a webinar and then making a distinction. It's a part of the puzzle, but it's many people involved in this process now that are researching, learning, and contributing to a committee to make these decisions. And so having a wide variety of content and diversifying your webinar formats allows multiple different entry points depending on wherever anyone is in this journey, whether it is from just learning about why this technology is important and should be part of your strategy, all the way to, you know, this is how this technology actually works and actually solves your problems. It's important to have content for any part of that funnel. Fourth, you know, what I find that is probably one of the hardest things to do, but probably the most beneficial, is creating content on a consistent cadence. You know, oftentimes, and this, I mean, a lot of this will depend on your resources and your ability to create content. But creating content on a consistent basis is absolutely key to keeping your audiences engaged and pushing them further and further closer to making a buying decision. And so like mentioned earlier, you know, 54% of the users on BrightTALK surveyed, or that BrightTALK had surveyed, do webinars on a weekly basis. You know, they are continually learning and educating. And so, you know, something that we're starting to look into and think more about is using episodic content to encourage audience to keep coming back. So, you know, again, think of the podcast model. You know, people know when a podcast is run. They know when it's usually released at a certain time and date every week. It's usually on a weekly basis, and it's usually discussion between two people. You know, overall, it's not. While it does take a little bit of work to create, you don't have slides, you don't have the the visuals, the branding, all you need in order to produce this content. And so something that we're looking to more and more is how do we create episodic content that has a related theme throughout, that is predictable and encourages people to come back. You know, BrightTALK is really good at driving users to view more content and to keep seeing more content in the channels that they're subscribed to. And so being able to you know, produce content on a weekly or bi-weekly cadence, you know, our audience has that desire. You know, we ask them, you know, if we created content on a serious basis, are you interested? And there's definite interest, because people are viewing on a weekly basis and they want to learn from you, because the goal here is to build that trust with your audience. You know, they won't choose to buy with you unless they trust that you know what you're talking about and you understand their pain points. So demonstrating that throughout your content and editorial strategy, and having content that is, especially with webinars, having content that is a little more top of funnel, a little more discussion based, a little easier to produce, and less maybe tidy and manufactured, but more authentic. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. In terms of the series and types of series of content, you know, we're finding, again, tips and tricks, actionable insights. I can't stress this enough. Actionable insights provide value with our audience. Providing value provides trust, builds trust. And so understanding their pain points and how they can solve those pain points without necessarily buying something from you immediately is a key part of this. For myself, you know, an example that comes to mind for me is actually HubSpot. I think HubSpot does a really great job at this, at producing content that provides actionable insights and tools and value that any marketer can use. I think they do a really great job of providing that value first so that you understand the value they can provide you. They do that without asking something from you all the time, which I think is important. Industry news analysis, you know, especially certain industries, will have more news-based, you know, content. For us, we see IT security breaches happen. I think there was just another breach with Citigroup or Citibank in the past few days that just got mentioned. Creating timely content and kind of focusing on the industry news and what that means for your industry provides a point of view and provides an understanding of what's going on and how that applies to an everyday person. It may not be the most converting content to pipeline, but again, this is the type of content that you use to acquire audiences and potentially even nurture. Again, you're trying to build this trust with your audience. And then finally, one-on-one expert interviews. Again, for me, this is primarily that podcast model, and so being able to interview experts in your industry that are third parties and leverage their insights to double down on your own expertise, as well as to expand your reach into that influencer and experts realm of knowledge and their network is crucial. And we find that to be, for us, really interesting as we interview different experts in things like our BrightTALK at Summit, whether in series and some things coming up in the future. And so next, finally for me, be authentic and human is the last best practice. A lot of time is spent, and I work with a lot of clients that may not be able to produce a weekly webinar. That's okay. But instead they spend 2, 3, 4 months spending time on one presentation to make sure it's absolutely perfect and ensure that it hits all, obviously our messaging and branding and tells the right story. I find that sometimes we over manufacture some of these webinars and we focus too much on making sure it's perfect and less on making it feel that it's a natural conversation and it's a natural presentation with the audience. And so I find that there's a balance between, of course, preparing for your presentation, preparing for the content, but, being to a point where you're reading, from a script and you can tell the person's reading, it actually hurts you more. It hurts you more than it actually helps you. And so making sure that you are authentic and it feels natural, as well as you're telling a story, again, because people, you can have feature lists and talk about how the technology works in demo videos elsewhere. But in this type of content, these types of webinars, it's a one-to-many conversation. And so being able to engage and feel that you are explaining real narrative, real life stories and making it feel less manufactured in that way, I find to be most important. Because really, again, people want to hear from real people with real problems. That's why solution case studies is, one of the top tactics. They want to see, how did you help someone else solve the same problem I have? So, we recently did, like I said, a survey with our audience. What we found in terms of making sure that you create authentic connections with our audience is ensuring that the abstract and title and the source of content is, for us, the key things to ensure that people actually register for your content. So for the abstract and description, it's things like, ensuring that you are explaining what they're going to learn, the value they're going to get from this webinar, and the actual insights that they'll get. What will they get? And in addition to that webinar title, obviously it's the first thing, just like any newsletter headline, it's the first thing people are going to see, and it's the first thing that's going to grab their attention. And so ensuring that you have a crystal clear and concise webinar or title is incredibly important. Don't worry about being too clever. Don't worry about, ensuring that you've got all your marketing speak in there. Really focus on what's the value that someone's going to get out of this presentation, because that's what they're looking for. That's what they want. And in addition to that, but there's a balance here, right? If your presentation is a presentation on your product, be clear about it. What we have found more often than not is we try and position all of our content as thought leadership. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. And you really need to ensure you're not bait and switching because of your content by producing a webinar title that's that makes it seem as if it's going to talk about trends, but then halfway through you go right into a demo. That what happens there is you lose your trust with your audience. They thought they were going to get one thing, and they got something else. If you're going to be, I mean, like I mentioned before, you need to have a mix of content in your webinar strategy on BrightTALK. But ensuring that you don't bait and switch them with content that's really more product focused versus being industry trends, you've got to be careful there. What you're seeing here is, I believe, from the Demand Gen report that of a recent survey about how B2B buyers look at vendor content. For me, that really sticks out is the sales messages, obviously. Use more data and research. Obviously, that relates back to our own finding, BrightTALK's own findings, right? You have exclusive content, exclusive insights that only you can share. That is kind of editorial gold. And how do you use that and how you leverage that in a way to help build up your demand and pipeline and build trust with your audience is, I think, one of the biggest things that you can do if you have it. Second thing, again, the curb the sales messages. Again, it's about, for me, if it's going to be a sales message, it's going to be a demo, position as a demo. Because what you're going to find is that people will go and register for it or view it, and they'll more likely be ready to buy. If you position your content as thought leadership, drive hundreds of people, but they thought they were going to get insights, and you gave them a demo, it counters the impact you're trying to have. And then again, like mentioned always, and this goes quite well with the research we find, insights from industry thought leaders analysis. Third parties, I think, are great. You running your own panels with other experts within your industry, independent experts, consultants, people who are on the ground floor seeing these problems that your potential buyers have, explaining how these technologies that you are selling can help them, I think is key. And then also make it easier to access and don't overload with too much copy. Just general best practices around presenting. And so that's really it in terms of our best practices that we find. Overall, across the 2,000 webinars that BrightTALK runs, as well as the clients that we consult with, we find that there's a lot of ways you can diversify the way in which you're approaching webinars, especially on third-party platforms like BrightTALK. You have an audience that knows you, your own audience, and the audience you're nurturing from BrightTALK. But you also have an opportunity to get even more leads and more organic traffic and buy leads from us, drive more to your channel to build it up, especially if you have a wide mix of content and you're thinking about webinars not only as a nurture and a bottom funnel piece of content, but also as a audience and user and lead acquisition strategy as well. It's why you're seeing a lot of companies using podcasts nowadays. More and more are popping up every day, and why they became more and more wide stream. And so leveraging your webinars in this way and being able to leverage a third party and outside audience like BrightTALK is so important to help you build up your pipeline, as well as diversify the type of content and build trust with your audience. And with that, I will be going to questions. So as a reminder, you can ask questions using the question tab in the left-hand corner of your screen. There's also attachments you can download. And following or during this presentation, feel free to give me feedback on the bottom right using the ratings functionality. So going through the questions we received so far. So first question is webinar viewing time trending up or down over time? So this is interesting. We covered this quite a bit in our benchmark report, which is attached. But what we've been finding is a few different things. We're finding that over time, more users are viewing more content overall. So I believe from, I don't remember the specific statistic off the top of my head. I'd have to go look it up. But we've seen that the overall amount of content a user views is increasing. What we're actually noticing and seeing more and more is that the live viewing time and the percentage of people that view live is decreasing a little bit over time. How we read into this and what we're seeing is that people actually value, if they can attend live, they will attend live. Because the value of being able to ask questions especially an expert you might be halfway around the world from, is such a powerful, useful opportunity that people, if they can make it, will make it. But people get busy. People might register, a few weeks out and things change. Their meeting schedules, add on. It's tough to get people to attend live. But what we're seeing is that people are coming back and viewing on demand. Their preference is actually not to view on demand, or excuse me, not to view live. It's actually to view on demand when they have time and the ability to view. So, having a platform that allows you to download content like the BrightTALK app does, being able to view that content wherever, whether they're traveling, whenever they have some downtime, is such a key part that we're seeing actually the viewership increase, especially on the on-demand aspect. Let's see. So another question here is, what do you currently use for your editorial calendar? So good question. So I didn't show this, which as an editorial calendar, presentation is a bit of a miss, but we're actually in a transition process right now. So there's been a few things going on in terms of the BrightTALK structure in terms of our editorial team. And so previously, because we had one team doing all the editorial previously, we've been using Google spreadsheets as an easy way for us to track. We also we have quite a bit of our platform is built out on Salesforce. So we have an integration with Salesforce and Google Sheets that allows us to track production and producing of the webinars, as well as planning out further ahead. What we're starting to evaluate, though, and I'll explain the reason why, but what we're starting to evaluate now is Airtable. Airtable, some people call Airtable glorified spreadsheets, but it actually is so much more powerful than that, and it has a level of flexibility and customization that spreadsheets can do, yes, if you want to spend the time to go and do that. And so we're now currently looking at Airtable for us producing content across multiple different teams as we look at building out some of our BrightTALK summits, as we look at building out more of the content that my team creates, as well as some original content we're thinking about producing over the next few months. So there's another interesting question here. How do you recommend balancing the need to build your trust with audience and the need to engage them with your solutions? Concern that being that if you only do thought leadership, you never get them to point out considering your solutions. It's a great question. I find that if you try, what I've seen work well and I've seen not work well is that if you try and do multiple different goals at once with your content, especially one piece of content, you won't achieve any of it. So I'll give you an example. Probably the most common webinar I see with clients, especially when they bring in a third-party speaker, is leveraging an analyst firm that will go over, insights for the first 5-10 minutes of the presentation, and then switch over to maybe it's a customer that explains that story of the problem they had and why it worked and why the solution worked, and then going into a demo. I find that can work as long as it's really clear that's what you're covering in the webinar itself. So you get a balance within the content. And honestly, if you can only produce a webinar a month, you might as well try and get the most bang for your buck. But if you have the ability to create multiple pieces of content a month, or do interviews, whether you're at conferences or do podcasts or things like that, I highly recommend having each piece of content focusing on a specific goal. So that, you're going to do a monthly panel on industry insights or news or whatever is happening in the industry. That piece of content is going to be focusing more on acquisition and more drawing in new people or people who might just have joined your database or not as nurtured as others. Send them there so that what you're doing is focusing on building, because ultimately you're providing them with more than just that one piece of content. The other thing I also typically recommend is that, BrightTALK, you can embed the platform on your site. There's no reason why you can't have a panel that's more thought leadership focused and having other additional content that's maybe a little more bottom funnel, maybe more solution case study around it, so that what you've started doing is developing a learning journey for them. This is the content that might have got them to your database or start building up your trust with your audience. but you complement that with more bottom funnel surrounding it. So if they're further along than you think, they will go and self-select themselves. Another question here is there an ideal optimal webinar length? Is it better to aim for 25 to 30 minutes or 45 to 60? So this is a good question. You know, typically what we tend to see across the board, most webinars are between 45 and 60 minutes. And I think for me, it really depends on the type of content that you're creating. I think it's really tough to do a panel with 3 to 4 presenters to try and do that in 25 to 30 minutes. That leaves 5 minutes maybe for each panelist, and they're not gonna have enough time to tell their perspective and point of view. So I really do think it's tied to the type of content. For us, what we tend to see is, you know, panels, more long-form content does well. You know, people when they attend live will generally stay for about, I believe the stat was 92%, give or take, of the content. And so as long as you're providing value, they're staying because they're listening, they're already here. I find that if you want to do interviews or more, even tips and tricks, I would tend to make that a shorter piece of content. You don't need to have an hour long to talk about all the best practices. You can instead break it down into more digestible pieces and have it as part of your strategy. Because what you're, like for example, you know, we talked about taking questions from Quora, from different sources, from your own webinars, right? You can easily create 5-10 minute piece, even a video or even a screen share of you specifically answering that question, even posting on Quora, for example. So it really depends on what you're trying to do with that content and its goal, as well as the type of content. It's for me, it's very much intrinsically connected. So the last question I got here is there less tolerance for 1 hour webinar when someone reviews on demand? So we do find that when our audiences are reviewing on demand, they typically, again, it depends on the content, but for most of the time, they will spend probably about half the time on the webinar than someone reviewing live. There's a few different reasons for this. For a live webinar, you know, the beginning of the presentation, I give an intro, I do my housekeeping items, I eat up about 5 minutes of that presentation right then. You know, so people skip through it, you know, because it's on demand, people can skip through the content and go look for the parts that they want. So it's easy for them to go in and find the parts, the tips that they want and just take those. So it doesn't mean that you shouldn't do 1 hour webinars, but you should be aware that your on-demand audiences will interact with your content differently than someone who's doing live. It's just kind of the nature of, you know, live and on-demand content. And then in terms of the last question I have here is, how do you tell what your audiences are engaging with as you plan the editorial calendar? Is it the frequency of access to your blogs, the content, etc.? So, you know, BrightTALK is a bit unique where we have, you know, we're able to see a lot of the interactions across the entire site and be able to look at an aggregate level to create insights from that. So something that's actually interesting that's coming out from BrightTALK relatively soon is an insights feature within our channel. So you can go and look at what topics different individuals are viewing to help you plan out your own editorial calendar. But I mean, there's a number of different sources you can look at. I know that lots of people look at, you know, which blogs, for example, are performing the best. Of course, that's an entry point to your website that people found you. I mean, that is, of course, a great source. And building off of that or complementing that with a webinar is an easy way for you to not have to come up with another idea and increase the shelf life of that content and probably keep feeding that blog post as well and make it a little bit more evergreen. You know, it really just depends on the data sources that you have, but I highly, highly recommend you not focusing just on what you're seeing for yourself in your own data, because what will happen is kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. You will keep talking about what's best and what we're doing best, but you never expand outside those topics. And so testing new topics, you know, in a small controlled test, seeing how well they perform by looking at external trends. Like I said, we use BuzzSumo and we like it a lot because it helps us aggregate enough data the focus our editorial calendar. It just really depends on what you have. Google Trends, I know a lot of people use that. I don't love that. I don't think it gives you enough insights. But there are other tools out there around keywords, looking at keywords, analyzing keywords, and SEO, mods, things like that you can use to get those insights. But I highly recommend kind of expanding as much as you can outside kind of the normal realm of content and pain points, because ultimately what you start doing is, especially over the years, if you're not producing more products and the same pain point, it gets stale. What is the different approach and impression you're going to make? To really, if they haven't got attracted by that content earlier, doing it again in a slightly different webinar title isn't going to necessarily change the status quo. So, how can you expand outside that and look at outside trends and how that impacts your industry? And I believe that is all of the questions I have in today. Thank you so much for joining me today. Again, there are additional attachments and resources in the attachment sections below. Please do provide me feedback. I'd love to hear from you in terms of how well I did, as well as any insights. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn through the attachment section on this webinar. And thank you so much. Have a good rest of your day. Goodbye.